Good afternoon. I am Carla Brown, and I am your host today. Today, we cover the wars and rebellion in Jamaica. This is part 1 of a 4-part study. We will cover the First Maroon War and end with an analysis of the Maroon Treaty of 1738. The First Maroon War occurred in Jamaica from 1728 to 1739. It was a significant battle that illustrated the fight between the enslaved African population, the Maroons, and the British colonizers. The Maroons were mostly made up of formerly enslaved individuals who had fled their plantations. They strongly opposed British authority and aimed to create independent communities. During the First Maroon War, Cudjoe and Governor Edward Trelawney stood out as key figures. Cudjoe was a skilled leader of the Leeward Maroons, who organized them into a potent guerrilla force. Thanks to his strategic thinking, the Maroons successfully resisted British attempts to encroach on their land. On the other side was Governor Trelawney, who attempted to control and quell the Maroon communities in Jamaica. Despite having considerable military resources, Trelawney struggled to overcome the Maroons' expert knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla warfare tactics.
During the 18th century, the Caribbean was a hotly contested region for the various European powers due to its abundance of valuable commodities such as sugar and tobacco. Jamaica, under British control since 1655, was a significant sugar producer. However, the enslaved African population who worked on the plantations was a constant source of concern for the British. Many escaped and formed Maroon communities in the rough terrain, which caused anxiety for the British due to the loss of labor and the potential for inspiration among the rest of the enslaved population. During the Maroon War, the British were faced with a significant challenge. The Maroons, who were familiar with the rough terrain of the Jamaican interior, were able to resist British forces for 10 years. Governor Trelawney eventually recognized that military subjugation was not a practical solution and instead sought a peace agreement due to the prolonged conflict and the Maroons' unyielding resistance. In 1739, a treaty was negotiated by Quayo and Cudjoe, representing the Maroons, and John Guthrie and John Campbell, representing the British, significantly developing their conflict. The treaty stipulated that the Maroons would continue residing in their 5 main towns, namely Trelawney Town, Accompong, Moore Town, Scots Hall, and Nanny Town, and be governed by their chiefs with a degree of autonomy. They were required to allow a specific number of British supervisors to live among them, return any future runaways, and support the British in case of invasion or rebellion. In return, the Maroons were granted official freedom, given land, and no longer had to fear being re-enslaved. In 1739, the treaty was signed to signify the end of the First Maroon War. This was a significant accomplishment for the Maroons as it officially recognized their freedom and independence, although some terms favored the British. Although it did not completely resolve the conflict between the Maroons and the British, it created a basis for a relatively peaceful period until the Second Maroon War in 1795.
The First Maroon War is important in fighting for freedom against colonial oppression. The Maroons, led by figures such as Cudjoe, bravely fought against the mighty British colonial forces and finally reached a peace agreement that granted them their freedom. This conflict and the subsequent treaty highlight the intricacies of power, resistance, and negotiation in the face of colonial exploitation and the fight for liberation.
That's all for now, and good night.